Probably everyone is familiar with that feeling when, in the midst of everyday hustle, a quiet pause suddenly appears, and in that moment, you want to understand a little more than just what to do next. We begin to take interest in what lies behind actions, thoughts, choices. A person has always searched for meaning in work, in relationships, in their own dreams. And what's interesting is that this search has accompanied humanity for thousands of years. Philosophy was not born in professors' offices, but wherever someone dared to ask questions that usually aren't asked. Why do we suffer? Why do we strive for more? Why does it sometimes feel as if we are guided not by logic, but by something deeper? It seems that the modern world gives us answers to any question in a second, but at the same time, it is today that we most often lose ourselves. There is too much information and understanding. On the contrary, less. And perhaps that is precisely why people are returning to philosophy again, not as an abstract science, but as a quiet tool that helps make sense of life. In this lecture, we will try to walk the path of different traditions of thought, from the Stoics to the Buddhists, from the Taoists to the existentialists. Each of them answers the same question in its own way: how to live so as not merely to exist, but to feel one's own path. So if you too ask yourself these questions from time to time, make yourself comfortable. Now we are setting off on a journey of thought that has lasted for thousands of years, and perhaps will help you see your own inner horizon a little more clearly. Stoicism, throughout the entire development of world ethical thought, the problem of happiness has occupied one of its central places. So what is happiness? What should be the foundations of human behavior? What should a person be guided by in order to ensure for themselves and others deep and lasting happiness? These questions, in various formulations, were posed by Socrates and Aristippus, Epicurus and Zeno, Pyrrho and Seneca, Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, Spinoza and Helvetius, Kant and Hegel, Feuerbach and Marx. The problem of happiness has emerged today as sharply as never before. On the one hand, the enormous number of deceptive pleasures and fascinations of the present day, and on the other hand, the horrifying rates of heart attacks and nervous illnesses around the world, testify to an acute deficit of happiness, its obvious impoverishment, and the narrowing of its sphere. The goal of Stoicism is very simple and clear: to live better here and now. Isn't this what every person has always strived for since time immemorial? Therefore, it seems quite understandable that the ancient classical teaching has retained devoted followers to this day. Stoicism was founded around 300 BCE. Its founder, the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Citium, arrived in Athens after a shipwreck and began studying philosophy with renowned thinkers. Later, he created his own philosophical school, which met in a colonnaded hall called the Stoa Poikile, the painted Stoa. It is precisely from this meeting place that the name Stoicism originates. The Stoics understood logic broadly, considering within its scope dialectics, in fact, the science of true and false statements, as well as rhetoric, the art of oratory. Unfortunately, the logical works of the Stoics have not survived. However, historical philosophical reconstruction based on fragments from Chrysippus allows us to form a certain idea of what kind of logic the Stoics developed. For the Stoics, logic had a direct connection with physics. Any reasoning is possible only due to the presence of causality in the world. Stoic dialectics distinguished between the sign, designation, the signified, meaning, that which is expressed, and the object as such, real sensory objectivity. At the same time, signs and objects are by nature corporeal, material, while the signified, lecton, is incorporeal. The elementary unit of logic is an impression. A true impression was called cataleptic, one that grasps reality. From cataleptic impressions, simple true statements are formed, from which more complex ones can then be constructed. It is interesting that while constructing formal logic, the Stoics did not use Aristotle's syllogistics. Instead, Chrysippus developed the historically first system of propositional logic, close to modern propositional calculus in mathematical logic. The difference between them is that Aristotle's syllogistics works with judgments by analyzing their subject-predicate form, whereas propositional logic studies the conditions of truth of complex statements, taking into account only the connectives and the order of combination of elementary statements from which complex statements are formed. For thousands of years, the basic principles of Stoicism have been useful to both the successful and the disillusioned. Stoics included the emperor of ancient Rome, Marcus Aurelius, the philosophers Epictetus and Seneca, and many other outstanding figures of different eras. Bold ideas and powerful practices of Stoicism remain useful to this day. Today, they can become a tremendous source of inspiration for managing stress, inner transformation, and the ability to remain calm during minor troubles and serious upheavals. In this video, we will look at the main principles of Stoicism that can make life better and transform one's attitude toward unpleasant situations. 1. Do not waste energy on things we are unable to control. First of all, it is important to learn to distinguish what is within our control and what is not. According to the observations of the Stoics, people tend to wastefully distress themselves over the thoughts and actions of others. Unfavorable weather, events in the world, accidents, and losses. We allow these things to influence our perception of the world and destroy our sense of happiness. But these are precisely the life circumstances that cannot be influenced. Instead, it is worth focusing efforts on one's own inner world and actions. 2. Remember that everything around us is impermanent. Memento mori. Remember death. This Latin expression did not become proverbial by chance. It is not only a reminder of the brevity and preciousness of life, but also an invitation to reflect on the meanings of human existence. The Stoics tried not to forget that death will inevitably catch up with everyone. Such a thoughtful attitude did not allow them to take sunrises and sunsets for granted. Followers of Stoicism valued each new day and the opportunities it brings as much as possible. 3. Accept reality as it is. Epictetus said, "Do not seek for everything to happen as you wish, but wish for everything to happen as it happens, and everything will be fine." No, this is not a call to passivity. The idea is to learn to love and appreciate what you have. You can start with simple things, such as a quiet morning, a cup of coffee, a child's embrace. Noticing beauty and harmony in everyday life is a very valuable skill. 4. Move patiently toward a set goal. Stoics refuse to be passive victims of circumstances. To make their lives better, they act, but not at random. Their goal is determined by high ideals and unconditional values. Unshakable ascetics proceed from decisions made in advance. This allows them to focus on what is important and not be distracted by trifles. To achieve a goal, one must stock up on considerable patience. For those who want everything at once, the doors slam shut. But if one acts gradually and with clear calculation, the matter will certainly move forward. Even the most difficult tasks are within reach for the patient. 5. Be virtuous. Seneca said, "A good character is the only guarantee of eternal, carefree happiness." He believed that the path to true well-being is not an egoistic pursuit of pleasures, but a life guided by honesty, ethical behavior, and service to others. The greatest importance is given to 4 virtues: courage, readiness to face unpleasant things head-on; temperance, avoidance of excess in everything, food, luxury, and leisure; justice, the necessity to act rightly, even if it is uncomfortable, difficult, or costly; wisdom, the ability to constantly learn and maintain an open mind; 6. Resist the whims of the mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote about 4 destructive habits of the mind that are important to notice and eradicate. Excessive imagination. The Stoics call for avoiding obsessive worries about past problems and reflections on possible troubles in the future. Antisocial behavior. Before saying or doing something, ask yourself whether it will harm someone. As the well-known saying goes, the freedom to wave your arms ends where your neighbor's nose begins. Insincere thoughts or actions. Marcus Aurelius urges us to do only what we truly believe in. A tendency to give in to physical impulses, bodily temptations, should not prevail over reason. 7. Think through possible troubles in advance. Epictetus said, "When going to the baths, be prepared that someone may splash water on you." The essence of this thought is to predict probable scenarios in advance and to think through your reaction. Psychological preparation will not allow troubles to take away your calm or disturb your inner balance. For example, when preparing for a trip, try the day before to imagine the worst-case scenario and how you would cope with it. Such an approach removes anxiety about uncertainty. 8. Bird view. A view from above. Our problems are small, even when they seem big. This becomes clear if we broaden our perspective and look at everything from a bird's eye view. We owe the modern revival of Stoicism to Ryan Holiday, who wrote the book The Obstacle is the Way, which quickly became a bestseller. The main idea of his work is that tragedies, failures, and defeats are in fact wonderful opportunities for growth. A view from above makes life easier and makes us stronger. 9. Reduce your ego. The ego seeks constant confirmation of its importance. We compare ourselves to others, seek approval, fear criticism. This creates a closed circle of dissatisfaction. By reducing the ego, we open the door to true freedom and happiness. This is the path to harmony with oneself and the world. Practices for working with the ego, meditation, and self-awareness. Find time to listen to yourself without external noise. Limiting social media. Set boundaries so as not to fall into the trap of comparisons. Service to others. Helping others shifts the focus away from one's own problems and egocentrism. 10. Feel gratitude. The Stoics believed that gratitude is the path to inner peace. By accepting life as it is and appreciating every moment, we move closer to harmony with ourselves. Epictetus said, "Wise is the one who does not grieve over what he does not have, but rejoices in what he has." Gratitude is our support that opens a powerful flow of positive energy, changes us for the better, and testifies to the nobility of the soul. Take the first step today. Start small. Thank yourself for being who you are. Call a friend and tell her how much you value her presence in your life. Feel how gratitude fills you with warmth and light. Stoicism offers us a key to a life filled with meaning and calm. In a world where everything changes at a frantic speed, the principles of the Stoics help us find an unshakable support within ourselves. Modern people face many challenges, but it is precisely turning to one's own wisdom and simplicity that can become what makes life fuller and happier. Allow yourself to feel the power of Stoicism, and you will see how your world changes. Taoism. The founder of Taoism is considered to be the semi-legendary sage Laozi, Li Er, Li Boyan, who lived in the 6th-5th centuries BCE and possibly even earlier. The main treatise of Taoist philosophy, The Way of Virtue, Tao Te Ching, is attributed either to Laozi himself or to his followers who adhered to the core principles of their teacher. Taoists called for following nature and living a natural life. They interpreted Tao as the main thing in all things, the root, the mother of earth and heaven, the primordial basis of the world, the creator of all that exists, which exists in complex interconnections and interdependencies. A person depends on the earth on heaven, the cosmos, heaven on Tao, and Tao on itself. Some key concepts, such as Tao and Yin Yang, are known to most people, but to understand the essence of Taoism and grasp its meaning, many years are required. Here, we will briefly consider its main ideas, as well as the history of its origin and development. Sometimes it is divided into philosophical Tao Jia and spiritual Tao Jiao components. However, such a division is very conditional, and it is more appropriate to speak of a single religious philosophical teaching that seeks to provide answers to all questions in all spheres of life. Taoism arose in the 5th century BCE, which makes it one of the most ancient teachings in the world. The key concept of Taoism is Tao. The literal translation from Chinese is the way. It is the highest law of the world order, the path along which all that exists moves. According to this concept, any material thing goes through its path from emergence to disappearance. In the understanding of Chinese philosophers, Tao is the eternal action or principle of creation that embodies the unity and duality of things and determines the natural movement of everything in nature. Unlike other religions, Taoism does not consider such a concept as life after death. Instead, Taoists strive to overcome their passions and desires in order, during their lifetime, to achieve unity with Tao, equivalent to immortality. As noted above, Taoism is a religious philosophical teaching, and within it, one can conditionally distinguish two directions: Tao Jia, philosophical cognition of the universe and being; Tao Jiao, religious teaching and spiritual practices. Nevertheless, such a division is conditional, and Taoism is more appropriately viewed as a complex system that combines both spiritual and philosophical aspects. The main ideas of Taoism. The central concept in Taoism is Tao. It is the universal law that determines the existence of all that exists, from the moment of emergence to the moment of disappearance. Everything in our world is subject to Tao. Things and people, thoughts and ideas, the moon and the sun, even the universe itself, has a beginning and will someday come to a Zakanamunho end. Obeying this principle, it is believed that if a person is able to comprehend Tao, they will achieve immortality. And the process of this comprehension involves applying effort in two directions: nourishing the soul. This refers to inner harmony, overcoming passions and desires for the sake of understanding Tao; nourishing the body. This concerns attitudes toward food, breathing, physical exercises, sex, and other natural needs. Taoism requires adherence to strict moderation in everything, and the ideal is considered to be a complete transition to spiritual sources of nourishment and the rejection of ordinary food. In Taoism, it is believed that these two elements are sufficient to comprehend Tao and achieve immortality of both soul and body in this world. Another important concept is Di, virtue or morality. It does not imply purposeful, highly moral influence on the surrounding world. Within this teaching, it refers to the strength of spirit that a person must have in order to be able to comprehend Tao. Another important concept of the teaching is Wu Wei, non-action. It is the rejection of purposeful activity that may disrupt the natural course of events. Wu Wei does not imply passivity. Its essence lies in the fact that a person should understand when it is necessary to act and when it is not. Taoists consider this idea correct even in the sphere of governing the state, claiming that the best ruler is the one who does nothing. He holds his position in order to inspire the people, embody state power, and prevent unrest. What is Tao? As we have found out, the word Tao is translated as the way. In Confucianism, this word denotes a person's life path. In Taoism, Tao embodies the law by which every object, every phenomenon, and every living being exists. It is the absolute to which all objects and phenomena known to us are subject. Tao implies that the entire world is in continuous motion. Everything changes. Everything has a beginning and an end. And only Tao is eternal. Conventionally, Tao is considered the supreme deity in Taoism, although this is an incorrect statement, since Tao ceased to be a god. Tao is the primordial basis, the main principle and law that indicates the direction of movement for all that exists, including the universe. The greatest happiness for a follower of Taoism is the cognition of Tao and unity with it. It is believed that this state can be achieved only through strict observance of the rules proposed by the teaching on both the spiritual and bodily levels. The necessity of their observance is explained by the fact that divine spirits and evil demons fight for the soul of each person. Some actions nourish the spirits, others the demons, and the teaching instructs how exactly one should behave in order to strengthen the spirits and weaken the demons. The connection between Taoism and Confucianism. Confucianism is an ethical, social, moral, political, religious, and philosophical teaching developed by Confucius at the turn of the 6th and 5th centuries BCE. It was a difficult period in the history of ancient China, so the main task of the teaching was to ensure the harmonious existence of our society and state. Much attention is paid to such aspects as respect for state authority, observance of laws, and reverence for traditional values. It is believed that the founder of Taoism, Laozi, was acquainted with Confucius and was interested in his teaching. But later, he realized that the ideas of Confucianism were alien to him. This understanding intensified as he became disillusioned with Chinese statehood. This led him to create a new teaching, which in many points was the complete opposite of Confucianism. He set out its main ideas in the famous treatise Tao Te Ching, the Book of the Way and Virtue. Thus, Taoism initially finds itself in opposition to Confucianism, and the main contradiction between them lies in the interpretation of the concept of Tao, which is fundamental to both teachings. For Confucius, Tao is the path of a person, their personal choice made for the sake of achieving the common good. In Taoism, however, the path is an absolute, the natural state of things that does not depend on a person. If Confucianism preaches respect for state authority, Taoism believes that the state should not interfere in people's lives. Having strengthened themselves through the further development of their theory, Taoists in early medieval China managed to become a necessary and indispensable part of the spiritual culture of the country and its people. In the Tang era, 7th and 10th centuries, Taoists spread throughout the entire country. Large monasteries, built everywhere, became strongholds of Taoism. Their learned Laoist magi and preachers converted neophytes, acquainting them with the foundations of the theory of immortality. Taoist diviners and healers, having received basic education, dispersed throughout China and practically merged with the subjects of the Celestial Empire, differing from them neither in clothing nor in way of life, only in profession. Over time, this profession turned into a hereditary craft. To master it, there was no need for special training elsewhere. It was only necessary to certify one's professional level and obtain from the authorities a certificate granting the right to engage in one's own practice. Taoism sets itself the goal of revealing to a person the mysteries of the universe, the eternal problems of life and death, and it becomes clear why it arose. For beyond Confucianism lies the mystical and the irrational, not to mention ancient mythology and primitive superstitions. Without this, a person feels a certain spiritual discomfort, a certain emptiness that needs to be filled, and therefore all beliefs and rituals were united within the framework of the Taoist religion, which was formed in parallel with Confucianism. One of the most attractive points of Taoist teaching, both for common people and for the nobility, was the preaching of longevity and immortality. For those who had comprehended Tao, this idea was so captivating that emperors even equipped expeditions in search of elixirs of immortality and financed the work of Taoist magi on their production. In this way, Taoism managed to survive and strengthen under the dominance of Confucianism. At the same time, Taoism changed quite significantly. The ideas of Tao and Day were pushed into the background, while numerous magi, folk healers, and shamans who joined Taoism came to the fore. They skillfully synthesized certain Taoist ideas with peasant superstitions and thus gained very great power over them. The peasants, according to Tao, the human body represents a microcosm, a concentration of spirits and divine forces, the result of the interaction of the male and female principles. One who strives to achieve immortality must first of all try to create such conditions for all these spirit monads. There are about 36,000 of them, that they would not seek to leave the body. Taoists assumed this could be achieved through restrictions in food, special, physical, and breathing exercises. Also, in order to achieve immortality, the candidate had to perform no fewer than 200 good deeds, and at the same time, one bad deed would nullify them all. The very act of transformation was revered as so sacred and mysterious that no one could record it. There simply was a person, and then there was none. They did not die, but disappeared, leaving their bodily shell, dematerialized, ascended to heaven, becoming immortal. Over the centuries, Taoism experienced rises and declines, support and persecution, and at times became the official ideology of one dynasty or another. Nevertheless, It was needed both by the educated elites and by the uneducated lower strata of Chinese society. Taoism in China, like Buddhism, occupied a modest place in the system of official religious and ideological values. However, during periods of crisis, when centralized power declined, Taoism came to the forefront, manifesting itself in popular uprisings driven by the utopian ideas of Taoism. Over the centuries, Taoism experienced rises and falls, support and persecution, and sometimes, though for a short time, became the official ideology of one of the dynasties. Taoism was necessary both for the educated elites and for the poorly educated lower strata of Chinese society. Buddhism. Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, is the founder of Buddhism and one of the most influential figures in the history of humanity. His life is filled with events that not only shaped his spiritual path, but also influenced millions of people over the centuries. Let us consider several interesting facts about him. 1. A prophecy about his future. After Siddhartha's birth, seers predicted that he would either become a great ruler or renounce the world and become a spiritual teacher. This prophecy deeply affected his father, Raja Shuddhodana, who sought to make him a great king. Therefore, he surrounded his son with luxury and tried to protect him from the realities of the outside world in order to prevent a spiritual path. However, despite these efforts, Siddhartha chose the path of spiritual search. 2. The first sermon in the Deer Park. After attaining enlightenment, the Buddha traveled to Sarnath, where in the Deer Park he delivered his first sermon. He expounded the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which became the foundation of Buddhist teaching. This event is known as the turning of the wheel of Dharma and is considered the beginning of the spread of Buddhism. 3. Accessibility of the spiritual path for all. Unlike the traditions of Hinduism, the Buddha taught that spiritual development is accessible to everyone, regardless of caste or origin. He accepted people of different social statuses into his community, which contributed to the spread of his teaching among broad segments of the population. The Four Noble Truths. The first truth is that our life in general is unsatisfactory. From birth to death, we experience many joyful moments, but they never last long. At the same time, we experience hardships, suffering, illness, disappointment, loneliness, anxiety, and dissatisfaction are well known and understandable to everyone. Often this is not even related to what happens to us externally. We may be surrounded by our best friends, eating our favorite food, yet still be unhappy. Short-lived happiness, whatever we enjoy, never lasts long and does not truly satisfy us, but soon turns into suffering. Even if we are very cold and enter a warm room, after some time, we want to go back out into the fresh air. It would be wonderful if this happiness lasted forever. But the problem is that it never does. Problems that constantly repeat. The worst part is that our attitude toward life's ups and downs only creates new problems. For example, we find ourselves in a problematic relationship, but all our actions only worsen the situation. We may break up, But since we already have a bad habit, the same thing repeats itself in the next relationship. It also ends unsuccessfully. The second noble truth, the true cause of suffering. Our suffering and short-lived happiness do not arise out of thin air. There must be a whole set of causes and conditions for them. External factors, such as the society in which we live, are only conditions for the emergence of our problems. The Buddha advised looking for the true cause in our mind. Our own disturbing emotions, hatred, envy, greed, and so on, compel us to think, speak, and act compulsively, and as a result, we harm ourselves. The Buddha looked even deeper and saw the true cause underlying these emotional states, namely, how we perceive reality. We do not realize or understand the long-term consequences of our behavior, and we also have a completely mistaken idea of how we exist, how other people exist, and how the world exists as a whole. Instead of seeing the interconnectedness of everything, we tend to think that things exist on their own, independently of external factors. The third noble truth, the true cessation of suffering. The Buddha also taught that we do not have to put up with problems. If the cause is eliminated, the effects will not arise. If we rid ourselves of our false views of reality, problems will never return. He spoke not only about one or several problems. He said that we would stop creating any problems at all. The fourth noble truth, the true path of the mind. In order to get rid of our naivety and ignorance, we must apply what directly counteracts them. Plan wisely, taking a long-term perspective into account, instead of trying to obtain immediate gratification. Look at the bigger picture rather than focusing on one small aspect of life. Be aware of the consequences of our actions for our own future and for future generations, rather than simply doing what is convenient right now. Sometimes, when we experience disappointment, it seems to us that the only way to cope with it is to distract ourselves, overeat fast food, or drink without thinking about the long-term perspective. If we turn this into a habit, serious health risks arise that not only endanger our own lives, but can also negatively affect our loved ones. At the core of such behavior lies the idea that we have no relation to the consequences of our own actions. Therefore, the strongest antidote to such an idea is to realize that we are closely connected with the rest of humanity and with the planet itself, and understand that our notions of how we exist do not correspond to reality. If we can train ourselves in this understanding through constant meditation, we will eventually get rid of the confusion from which these empty projections arise. We all strive for happiness, yet it strangely continues to elude us. The method of searching for happiness, formulated by the Buddha in the Four Noble Truths, is universal, suitable for everyone, and remains relevant even 2,500 years after the Buddha first explained it. It is not necessary to become a Buddhist in order to use the Four Noble Truths to solve our everyday problems. It is impossible for everything to always be the way we want it to be. But this is not a reason to fall into depression and lose hope. The Four Noble Truths contain everything necessary to find true happiness and make our lives genuinely filled with meaning. In short, true suffering must be understood. The true cause of suffering must be eliminated. The true cessation of suffering must be attained. The true path of the mind must be put into practice. There is a path that leads to the overcoming of suffering. This is the Noble Eightfold Path, associated with the observance of 8 virtues. 1. Right view. It is necessary to believe in the Four Noble Truths in order not to deviate from the path taught by the Buddha. 2. Right intention. Readiness to master one's feelings and desires, to act in accordance with the truths. 3. Right speech. Truthful, peaceful, without idle chatter and obscene language. 4. Right conduct. Causing no harm to living beings, refraining from sensual pleasures, deliberate pursuit of profit, participation in good deeds. 5. Right livelihood. Earning a living honestly, behaving with dignity in society. 6. Right effort. Preventing everything that hinders liberation, overcoming what binds one to life, developing achieved successes, preserving accumulated merits. 7. Right mindfulness. Memory. Constantly remembering that life is filled with suffering and the necessity of detachment from worldly attachments. 8. Right concentration. Meditation. Achieving inner peace, self-control, steadfastness in striving to free oneself from bodily desires, indifference to suffering and loss. The Eightfold Path is usually divided by Buddhists into 3 parts. The first, 1 to 2, is connected with wisdom. The second, 3 to 6, with moral conduct. And the third, 7 to 8, belongs to the practice of contemplation, the purification of the mind, the training of thoughts, or yoga. One who follows this path first attains enlightenment, samadhi, and then the perfect state of nirvana. A person who has attained nirvana, an arhat, breaks the wheel of being and is no longer reborn in any bodily form. This inner extinguishing of sensuality and corporeality seems to free a person from their suffering I and from the craving for life that draws all living beings into endless rebirths. Thus, the power of karma is transformed, and the enlightened sage ultimately dissolves into absolute calm, into the harmony of the universe, which cannot be described using familiar categories and concepts. That incomparable island where nothing is possessed and nothing is desired, I call nirvana, the destruction of death and decay, said the Buddha. Few have reached this island, but even the gods envy those who have succeeded. Mindfulness. Mindfulness is a practice that involves increasing awareness of the present moment by focusing on thoughts, feelings, and sensations. Other names for this method are awareness meditation or self-awareness meditation. This term can also mean focusing on one task at a time without being distracted by anything else. Over the past 2 decades, meditation, using the mindfulness method, has gained enormous popularity in the United States and the countries of the European Union. Many people consider mindfulness to be a useful technique for improving overall well-being. This meditation method has a positive effect on mental, emotional, and physical health. Practicing mindfulness can help a person better perceive themselves and their surroundings. Teenagers and adults can use mindfulness as a tool for developing focus, concentration, and mental clarity, which can improve work, learning, and athletic performance. Research confirms that self-reflection can contribute to the development of self-esteem. This occurs when a person experiences personal growth by observing or analyzing themselves. On a physical level, mindfulness techniques can promote relaxation and reduce pain. Mindfulness practices have a positive effect on mental well-being and can help people develop a healthy way of thinking. Mindfulness meditation can help people learn to avoid getting stuck in negative patterns of thinking, which improves mood and overall well-being. By becoming more attentive, people can learn to let go of negative memories of the past and not worry unnecessarily about the future. This allows them to focus on present events, which can reduce stress and anxiety. Mindfulness can also reduce some symptoms of anxiety and depression. Mindfulness practices involve regulating thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Awareness meditation can be a structured practice and include moments to check in with oneself during a stressful day. Mindfulness can be practiced through individual sessions, apps, and online classes. One only needs to choose the option that suits best. Sometimes, starting a mindfulness practice can be difficult. For awareness meditation, it is worth setting aside a quiet room in order to better focus on calm and self-awareness. The practice space should be free from distractions, including household appliances, and have a comfortable place for sitting or lying down. It can be decorated with plants, candles, and cushions. Existentialism. The main tenet of existentialism is the postulate: existence, existence precedes essence, essence. In literary works, existentialists seek to comprehend the true causes of the tragic disarray of human life. Defining features of existentialism: priority is given to the categories of the absurdity of being, fear, despair, loneliness, suffering, and death. The individual must oppose society, the state, the environment, the hostile other, since all of them impose their will, morality, interests, and ideals on the person. Freedom and choice. What is freedom? The answer to this question was formed over time until it acquired its present features. G. W. F. Hegel, not without reason, defined world history as progress in the awareness of freedom. Later, F. Engels, in Anti-Düring, as if continuing this Hegelian thought, spoke of the fact that every step forward on the path of culture was a step toward freedom. And indeed, step by step, millimeter by millimeter, throughout history, people have reclaimed, affirmed, and developed this fundamental capacity. If the ancient Greeks and Romans perceived freedom as their natural property, a certain given that they must defend when it is threatened, then in ancient Judea, which was under the Roman yoke, The idea of freedom, beginning already from the 1st century CE, is transformed into ideas of liberation and becomes associated with uprising against foreign conquerors. The idea of freedom acquires qualitatively new features in Christianity, which transfers the already developed cultural idea of liberation, as we have seen, into an inner, spiritual moral plane. The human soul is freed from the all-encompassing dictate of the Old Testament law, and before it opens a space of free choice, free sacrifice, free response to God. Over the millennia of Christian history, freedom is affirmed as one of the deepest inner dimensions of human existence, of the human I. That is freedom. We read in Søren Kierkegaard, this human ability to introduce nothingness into the world, Sartre called freedom, which acquires an ontological status. If in N. Berdyaev, nothingness is not emptiness, but a certain primordial principle that precedes God and the world and contains no differentiation, a primordial chaos, then Sartre defines nothingness as lack, rarity, or as a gap or opening. But N. Berdyaev and J.P. Sartre agree that freedom is inherent in human beings from time immemorial. A person is free from birth, and their actions are absolutely free. The other two types of freedom in Berdyaev can be correlated with such counterparts in Sartre as responsibility and projection, or the creation of oneself by the human being. Unlike N. O. Berdyaev, who believed that the purpose of the human being, their sacred duty before God, is creative self-transformation, that a person must create from themselves a God-man, hence a certain limitation of human freedom, Sartre approaches freedom in a different context. Sartre is one for whom God is dead. That is, a person for whom God has moved into the realm of mythology along with elves and fairies. In one of his works, he wrote, "I had a need for God. They gave him to me. I accepted him without understanding that it was precisely him that I was seeking. Not having taken root in my heart, he lived in me for some time and then died." In his case, there is no vagueness, as in Heidegger. There is no doubt about his atheism. At times, he says that even if God did exist, it would change nothing, with regard to human freedom and responsibility at least. But in his lecture on humanism, he clearly proclaims that existentialism is only an attempt to draw all the consequences from a consistent atheistic position. And as we shall see, the conclusions he draws from atheism are very important. Sartre simply affirms atheism without much noise. The idea of God is the idea of an infinite, personal absolute, infinite for itself in itself. The idea of infinite, conscious self-identity. But this idea is self-contradictory. Consciousness excludes self-identity, and self-identity excludes consciousness. This does not simply mean that God does not exist. He cannot exist, since to assert the existence of God means to express a self-contradictory thought. There can be no God, and a person who strives for divinity is doomed to failure. Human existence, according to Sartre, is a continuous self-negation. In his concept of freedom lies the key to his entire worldview. both in his theoretical constructions and in his practical conclusions. Around this concept, like around its axis, revolves the entire anthropocentric, yet egocentric, philosophy of existentialism, the affirmation of freedom as an unconditional principle marks a break with determinism, rationalism, and an objectively scientific understanding of reality. Freedom is interpreted by Sartre in the spirit of complete indeterminism. Freedom places a person outside regularity and causal dependence. It expresses a metaphysical rupture with necessity, both in its objectively materialist understanding and with logical necessity. Freedom tolerates neither cause nor ground. Freedom is not determined by a person's ability to act in accordance with what they are, because freedom itself is the choice of one's being. A person is what they freely choose themselves to be. The present is not in a law-governed connection with the past, nor the past with the present. Freedom posits independence with respect to the past, its negation, a break with it. Freedom is human existence that removes its past from the game. According to Sartre, no objective circumstance can deprive a person of the freedom that is inseparable from them. The latter remains in any situation and is expressed in the possibility of choosing, not real possibilities, but one's attitude toward a given situation. Thus, the concept of freedom is consistently subjectivized by Sartre and is reduced to the relation of the subject to a circumstance independent of them. Their independence, in essence, lies in how they perceive their dependence. They can freely reconcile themselves with it. In this, they are just as free as when not accepting it and opposing it. A prisoner or a slave is free by self-determining their attitude toward their position. Moreover, the objective situation does not in itself limit or suppress our freedom, but only to the extent that we experience it as a limitation and relate to it as an obstacle. After all, an obstacle, a limitation, is defined by what we wanted. It is enough to abandon one's aspiration, and the given situation will cease to be an obstacle. A consistent conclusion from Sartre's absolutized concept of freedom would be the motto: the task is not to change the world, but to change one's attitude toward it. Albert Camus, The Philosophy of the Absurd. In French philosophy of the mid-20th century, the problem of the absurd becomes one of the most important. This problem is connected, first of all, with the philosophy of existentialism, and above all, with the work of J.P. Sartre and A. Camus. It was precisely through their efforts that existentialist philosophy found embodiment in literature. Such a combination of literature and philosophy is not an exceptional phenomenon, since French literature, like no other, has been able to come close to philosophy. The philosophical nature of literature is an ancient tradition that developed as early as the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and in the Age of Enlightenment, it reached a significant rise. It is worth mentioning, at least, the names of J.J. Rousseau, Montesquieu, Diderot, Voltaire, and others. It was in France that the genre of the essay originated, functioning at the intersection of philosophy and literature. And Camus was an artist essayist. Camus repeatedly stated that he was not a philosopher. Even in his youth, Camus wrote in his notebooks, "One thinks only in images. If you want to be a philosopher, write novels." Camus believes that the most important truths about oneself and the world are discovered by a person through feelings. He refers to Heidegger's anxiety and Sartre's nausea, turns to the philosophy of S. Kierkegaard, and reveals the fundamental questions of human existence. Following his predecessors, Camus defines the single feeling that characterizes human being. This feeling is the sense of absurdity. This feeling is capable of arising suddenly. It is enough for a person to fall out of everyday mechanical existence and become aware of their life, and the individual inevitably raises the question of whether life is worth living at all. The feeling of absurdity, once having seized a person's consciousness, can erase all other feelings. Camus defined the absurd as a metaphysical state of the human being in the world, and thus as the fundamental problem of human existence. For Camus, absurdity is not an ontological category immanent to the structure of the world. It is a product of human self-awareness in the world. The concept of the absurd in Camus and in Sartre differs already at its very foundation. Camus considers the absurd not as a conclusion drawn from an analysis of reality, but as an initial postulate with which reality must be compared, including the human being within it. In this case, not only the world should be considered absurd, but also all categories of human existence: absurd life, absurd suicide, absurd freedom, and so on. First and foremost, Camus turns to the problem of suicide. This problem interested Camus from his student years, and by the late 1930s, it had become especially relevant for France. Therefore, in the myth of Sisyphus, Camus emphasizes there is only one truly serious philosophical problem: the problem of suicide. To decide whether life is worth living or not means to answer the fundamental question of philosophy. In Camus, suicide is interpreted as a social phenomenon, but its causes are hidden in deeply subjective experiences. The feeling of the absurd, to which a person may arrive as a result of a rupture between oneself and one's life, like a rupture between the actor and the stage, can become a reason for suicide. It is precisely the connection between the absurd and suicide that the essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, is devoted to. Camus, first of all, considers the question of whether the absurd leads to death and brings to the forefront the question of ways out of this metaphysical state. A person who has become aware of the absurd, according to Camus, is forever dependent on it. In such situations, existentialist philosophers propose escape. Jaspers finds a way out in an act of faith. In Shestov, it is also a leap to God, and so on. According to A. Camus, there are only two ways out of the state of the absurd: physical suicide and philosophical suicide. Neither of these ways is legitimate for Camus, so he accepts neither of them. Outside the human mind, Camus writes, there is no absurd. Thus, together with death, the absurd disappears as well, like everything else. The absurd exists only in human consciousness. It arises from the confrontation of human consciousness with an unreasonable world, from a person's awareness of their thrownness and transience. Human consciousness disappears. The person themselves disappears. The absurd disappears. But this is not the way out that Camus seeks. Camus derived three consequences from the absurd: rebellion, freedom, and passion. By the mere play of consciousness, we read in Camus, I turn into a rule of life what was an invitation to death, and I reject suicide. The philosopher considers the absurd as a self-evident fact of human existence. Awareness of the absurd for Camus is the state of a person who has realized that life is not worth living. Without this awareness, there is no absurd either. But what is more important is something else. If life has no meaning, then what other way out is there besides suicide? Camus devoted the final chapter of his work to this question. The parable of Sisyphus. The idea a person creates themselves, perhaps one of the most famous phrases of existentialism, belongs to Jean-Paul Sartre. Existence precedes essence. Think of an ordinary object, for example, a chair. Before it appears, the craftsman has an idea, a drawing, a plan. That is, its essence, its purpose and form are already defined. First comes the idea, essence, then creation, existence. For centuries, many philosophers and religious thinkers believed that the same applies to a human being. Aristotle spoke of the nature of a human being. For example, being a rational animal. Religious views often claim that God created a person with a certain purpose, defining their essence even before birth. In these cases, essence precedes existence. Sartre, being an atheist, saw this differently. He said that a human being is not a chair. No one designed us with a predetermined goal or function. We simply appear in this world. We exist. And only then, throughout life, through our choices, actions, and decisions, we ourselves create who we are, our essence. We are not born heroes or cowards, good or evil. We become them. We are free to choose and bear responsibility for that choice. Each of us is a unique project that we ourselves bring into being. It is worth noting that not all existentialists, such as Heidegger, fully agreed with Sartre's formulation, but the idea of freedom and self-creation is central to many. Laws of thought. It is worth noting that logic is concerned not only with the forms of thinking, but also with those essential relations that arise between them in the process of reasoning. That consistent, non-contradictory, well-grounded connection that makes reasoning effective. These features of effective reasoning are ensured by logical laws. A law in general, in any science, physics, biology, jurisprudence, etc., is understood as an internal, essential, necessary connection between objects and phenomena that always and everywhere repeats under certain conditions. A logical law or a law of thought is an internal, essential, necessary connection between logical forms in the process of constructing reasoning. There are four main logical laws: the law of identity, the law of the excluded middle, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of sufficient reason. These laws are considered main or fundamental because they have the most general, universal character for all thinking, determine the operation of other non-fundamental laws, the law of the inverse relationship between the content and scope of a concept, the law of the distribution of terms in a judgment, the law of constructing inferences, etc. The specificity of logical laws lies in the fact that these are laws of thinking, not of reality itself. These laws have an objective character and operate in thinking regardless of the desire or will of people. Laws should be distinguished from norms of thinking, which are formulated by people in order to achieve truth. Then such expressions as must, should, ought are introduced into laws. In reality, a law owes nothing to anyone, just as, for example, in physics, the law of universal gravitation. All logical laws are organically interconnected and serve as the basis of successful, practical human activity. The laws of logic have an objective character and do not depend on the arbitrariness of the subject. They exist and operate independently of the will and desire of people. Human thinking spontaneously obeys the laws of logic. Every person, regardless of whether they know these laws or not, thinks in accordance with the laws. Materialist logic connects the emergence of the laws of logic with human practice. Practice convinced people that things have certain properties and are connected with each other in certain ways, and that thinking correctly reflects these objects only when thoughts are connected in accordance with how the objects themselves are connected in reality. Thus, formal logical laws have a universal human character. They are the same for all people, regardless of their class or national affiliation. If logical laws were different among different peoples and classes, there would never be mutual understanding between them. A specific feature of the laws of logic is that they have a wide scope of application, since they are observed in any science, in legal cognition, and so on. By observing these laws, we obtain new, true knowledge, even if we do not directly appeal to experience. Observance of the basic laws of logic is a necessary condition for the accuracy, clarity, consistency, and sound argumentation of our thinking. The laws of thought also have an axiomatic character. They are truths that do not require proof and have a historically non-transient character. That is, they have confirmed, manifested, and fixed their correctness in human consciousness. Logical laws have a relative character. Their requirements apply only to the sphere of thinking. Knowledge and conscious use of the basic laws of logic contribute to improving the quality and effectiveness of rational cognition. Violation of the requirements of the laws of logic leads to thinking becoming incorrect and illogical. In the practice of thinking, there are two kinds of logical errors associated with violation of the requirements of the laws of logic: sophisms and paralogisms. The law of identity is formulated as follows. Every thought about a specific object, about a specific property of it, in a specific reasoning, must preserve the same definite content. In symbolic form, the law of identity can be written as A is A, A, A. Aristotle, in his work Metaphysics, noted that it is impossible to think anything if one does not think each time something one. From this follows an important requirement. It is forbidden to take identical thoughts as different and different ones as identical. When this requirement is violated, it becomes possible to identify different thoughts and to distinguish identical ones due to the peculiarities of our natural language, which makes it possible to express the same thought through different linguistic forms. This leads to the substitution of the original meaning of concepts and to the replacement of one thought with another. Aristotle commented on the essence of the law of identity in Metaphysics as follows. It is beyond doubt that those who intend to converse with one another must to some extent understand one another. If this does not happen, how can they converse with one another? Therefore, each name must be understandable and refer to something, and not to several things, but only to one. And if it has several meanings, it is necessary to clarify which of them, in each case, is meant. Thus, if someone says that this is and at the same time is not, they deny what they affirm, so that according to their words, it turns out that what is does not have the meaning that it has. And this is impossible. It is necessary to remember two basic rules of the law of identity. In the process of reasoning about some object, it is necessary to think precisely about this object and not substitute it with another object of thought. In the process of reasoning, in an argument or discussion, concepts must be used in one and the same meaning. A thought is identical to itself if it is unambiguous. The law of non-contradiction is formulated as follows. Two opposite thoughts about the same object in the same respect cannot both be true at the same time. If the law of identity determines such a feature of our thinking as definiteness, the law of non-contradiction ensures its consistency and lack of contradiction. This law applies to contrary judgments, contraries, and to contradictory judgments, contradictories. In order to correctly determine the limits of the operation of the law of non-contradiction, it is necessary to understand the meaning of the relation of incompatibility. It can be of two kinds: of the opposite, contrary, kind, when opposite qualities are ascribed to the same object or to a class of homogeneous objects; of the contradictory kind, when in one judgment something is affirmed about an object or a set of objects, and in another the same is denied with respect to an individual object, a set of objects, or some part of the objects of that class. Certain logical errors are associated with violation of this law. It is important to remember that contradictions in judgments are a subjective phenomenon. They may be the result of insufficient knowledge about the subject or the result of demagogy, intentional or verbal tricks, outright deception, which is often encountered in legal practice. Therefore, the ability to expose and eliminate logical contradictions in the testimonies of the accused, witnesses, or the victim, and to use them in the interests of an objective court hearing, and the delivery of a fair verdict can be formed only through understanding and observing the law of non-contradiction. In legal practice, application of the law of non-contradiction makes it possible to carry out the codification of legislation, that is, the elimination of contradictions between articles or individual laws, in order to create a logical system of legislation. Observance of the priority of higher laws over lower ones allows for the determination of a certain hierarchy and logical structure of laws. The concept of alibi is based on the operation of this law. Proving an alibi consists in establishing that a given person was in another place at the time of the crime. And if this is true, then the opposite, that this person was at the scene of the crime, cannot be true. The law of the excluded middle is formulated as follows. Two contradictory thoughts about the same object at the same time in the same respect cannot be both true and false at the same time. One of them is true, the other is necessarily false, and there can be no third. It should be noted that the law of the excluded middle does not apply to contrary statements. It applies only to contradictory statements. The main condition for applying the law of the excluded middle in characterizing things and phenomena is the presence of a categorical alternative situation that characterizes the state of affairs in the form of a dilemma, either or. Plato commented on this law as follows: a person cannot be both healthy and ill at the same time. The law of the excluded middle must be followed when resolving alternative questions. One cannot evade a definite answer, nor can one look for something in between. However, mistakes may be made in formulating the choice. In addition, Aristotle already expressed doubts regarding the application of this law to future events. This law cannot be applied to judgments with an empty subject. Aristotle's doubts about the limits of application of this law prompted scholars of the 20th century to develop a new direction in logic, intuitionistic logic, in which the law of the excluded middle does not operate. The significance of this law in our thinking lies in the fact that it establishes intellectual boundaries for the search for truth. And beyond these boundaries, such a search is unjustified. In legal practice, this either-or principle has found wide application. Already in the Athenian court, where a double voting procedure was established. First, it was determined whether the defendant was guilty or not guilty, and then the measure of punishment. During a trial, it is determined whether a crime took place or did not, whether the suspect was at the scene of the crime or was not, whether they plead guilty or not, whether the accused is guilty or innocent, whether the court's verdict is correct or incorrect. Similarly, in civil law, for example, if the defendant does not acknowledge being the child's father, the court may order a forensic medical examination, and the expert either excludes that the child could have been born to this man or allows such a possibility. The law of sufficient reason is formulated as follows. Any true thought must be sufficiently justified. Reasoning is evidential when it not only asserts the truth of a conclusion, but also provides grounds that allow this proposition to be recognized as true. Sufficient grounds may include self-evidence, facts, theory, axioms, postulates, and laws. By its functional purpose, The law of sufficient reason serves as a kind of summary of the three preceding laws and characterizes such a feature of reasoning as groundedness. In his monadology, G. Leibniz formulates the law of sufficient reason as follows. No phenomenon can be true or real. No statement can be valid without a sufficient reason why things are so and not otherwise. Two types of errors are associated with violation of the law of sufficient reason. After this, therefore, because of this, the fact that one event occurred earlier in time does not mean that it is the cause of another event. Does not follow? To justify a conclusion, other statements or facts are used that are not logically connected with the conclusion. The law of sufficient reason is of great importance in cognition as a logical criterion of truth. In legal practice, in criminal law with regard to the accused, it is used as a preventive measure when there are sufficient grounds. In civil law, it is stated that civil rights and obligations arise from grounds provided by law. In court, a case will be considered only if there are sufficient grounds for this. A court verdict must be sufficiently substantiated. Non-standard thinking. Non-standard thinking is the ability to find new approaches and unconventional solutions in any situation. One of the best known and most effective methods for developing the ability to think non-standardly is solving situational puzzle problems. Lateral thinking, also known as lateral thinking, it is an approach to problem solving that encourages thinking beyond traditional linear methods. This term was introduced by psychologist Edward de Bono in 1967. He emphasized that unconventional approaches are precisely what can stimulate innovation. Instead of relying exclusively on logical or step-by-step reasoning, often referred to as vertical thinking, lateral thinking promotes the exploration of unusual ideas and perspectives. This method helps people break away from routine thinking processes in order to find creative solutions to complex problems, making it especially valuable in a dynamic work environment. By developing the ability to view problems from different angles, lateral thinking paves the way for more diverse and effective outcomes. How does lateral thinking help achieve better results at work? Optimizing processes with limited resources. When a team faces tight project deadlines and limited resources, lateral thinking can help optimize workflows or repurpose existing tools instead of waiting for additional resources. This approach helps the team meet deadlines without sacrificing quality by making the best use of what is already available. Rethinking customer service with the help of artificial intelligence. A company struggling with high customer service demands may respond more slowly to customer inquiries. Instead of hiring additional staff, a person who thinks non-standardly may suggest integrating AI-powered chatbots to handle routine inquiries. This solution increases efficiency and reduces response time, allowing the team to focus on more complex tasks. Redesigning office space for collaboration. If a team has weak collaboration and low productivity, lateral thinking can be applied. For example, instead of holding additional meetings, the office can be redesigned into an open space format making it more open for free communication. This helps improve teamwork without additional workload. How to improve lateral thinking skills. Challenge assumptions. Regularly question established methods and solutions. Ask yourself, what if we did this differently? Practice brainstorming. Set aside time for unrestricted brainstorming. Encourage open ideas, no matter how unconventional they may be. Listen to different perspectives. Communicate with colleagues from different departments or with different backgrounds. Diverse viewpoints can inspire new ideas. Take breaks. Sometimes, stepping away from a problem allows the mind to reset, giving space for creative ideas after returning. Use creativity tools, mind maps, vision boards, or apps designed for brainstorming and creative thinking. These tools will help you visualize and organize non-standard ideas more effectively. Lateral thinking is a skill that helps companies quickly adapt and win in conditions of constant change. By investing in the development of lateral thinking, you open the path to innovation for your team, increase its flexibility, and build a culture where bold decisions become the norm and complex tasks become points of growth. The inversion method. The inversion method is focused on considering a problem from the opposite side, on solving it by presenting the opposite of the desired result, on searching for solutions in a new, unexpected way, contrary to traditional views and beliefs. In the most general sense, inversion is seeing the opposite side of things, solving a problem from the end, reversing the main directions of action, parameters, materials, energy, information, work processes, form, properties, reversing time and space, functions and structure, changing methods of activity to their opposites, replacing symmetry with asymmetry, the moving part with the stationary one, and vice versa. By inversion of structure is meant a form of relations in a hierarchy in which a lower, subordinate element acquires primary importance in a given system without leaving its former hierarchical position. Basic rules. Always consider the opposite side of things. Instead of asking how to do something, ask how it should not be done. Begin solving a problem by trying to reformulate it. That is, to formulate a task that is the reverse of the given one. Use opposite procedures, means, and techniques in the process of solving a problem. Remember that inversion is the search for ideas in directions opposite to traditional views, beliefs, common sense, and formal logic. For every idea, look for a counter idea. Stages. Step 1. Clearly define the problem and its components. Step 2. Formulate the problem in reverse, changing a positive statement to a negative one, or replacing a positive outcome with a negative one. Ask not how the problem can be solved, but what actions would make its solution impossible, or how one could achieve the opposite effect. Simply ask, how can I achieve the opposite result? For example, if you want to increase sales, think about decreasing them. Step 3. Invert the object and the situation in any way. Look at the problem from the opposite point of view. If you are a man, look from a woman's perspective, and vice versa. Look at the object from the inside rather than from the outside, and so on. You can change the main concept, principles, physical elements, attributes. Step 4. Do what everyone else does not do. Use a list of pairs of opposite actions that can be applied to the problem. Simply ask yourself, what if I, and implement each of the opposites. Step 5. Collect all proposed ideas. Edit your thoughts so that they change their meaning to the opposite. Replace words with antonyms. Change word order. Play with the particle not. All ideas proposed for solving the opposite task are suitable for use, and none of them should be discarded. Step 6. Reverse ideas. All collected reverse ideas are now discussed, turned around, and transformed into real solutions to the current problem. Step 7. Evaluate the solutions. Assess the effectiveness and feasibility of these ideas. Choose the best ones and refine them if necessary. Step 8. Turn defeat into victory, or victory into defeat. If something is bad, think about the positive aspects of the situation. Advantages. Inversion is a simple and effective method for gaining a new perspective and generating productive ideas. Inversion is a powerful thinking tool because it shows us a new point of view on mistakes and obstacles that are not obvious at first glance. The inversion method and the search for alternative solutions are particularly effective in solving complex problems when logical techniques and thinking procedures prove to be fruitless. Applying the method allows one to find original solutions to a problem and to find a way out of seemingly hopeless situations. Examples of using the inversion method. The invention of the rocket by K. Tsiolkovsky. He decided that he had invented a cannon, but a flying cannon with thin walls that released gases instead of cannonballs. Suvorov, in order to stop soldiers who were fleeing the battlefield, ran alongside them, shouting, "We'll lure them in, brothers. We'll lure them in." A heavy stone that could not be moved was pushed into a previously dug pit. Conflict resolution. Instead of arguing, one can try to look at the situation from another person's point of view. Experiments with recipes in cooking, adding opposite tastes. For example, sweet and salty. Paradoxes as a tool for developing logic. The most famous contribution of Zeno to philosophy is his paradoxes, which demonstrate logical difficulties related to the concepts of motion, space, and time. Among the most well-known paradoxes are Achilles and the tortoise, the arrow, and the dichotomy. These paradoxes are based on three key premises. 1. Any unit has magnitude. 2. A unit is infinitely divisible. 3. A unit is indivisible. Zeno used the method of reductio ad absurdum to show that assumptions about the plurality of things and their motion lead to logical contradictions. For example, in the paradox Achilles and the tortoise, he argues that the faster Achilles will never catch up with the tortoise if it has an initial head start. This paradox highlights problems related to the infinite divisibility of space and time. Zeno's paradoxes had a tremendous influence on the development of logic and mathematics. They forced philosophers and mathematicians to reflect on the nature of continuity, infinity, and the mathematical continuum. Although Aristotle attempted to resolve these paradoxes, they remained unresolved until the development of modern mathematical concepts such as limit theory and mathematical analysis. Zeno also influenced the development of dialectics as a method of philosophical inquiry. His approach, which consisted in refuting opponents' theses by reducing them to absurdity, became an important tool in philosophical debates. Aristotle considered Zeno a pioneer of dialectics, emphasizing his role in shaping logical methods. The principle of empty space. In philosophy, this principle reflects the idea that space is not merely a simple container in which everything happens, but an active participant in interaction. It may be empty of matter, but not of structure and possibilities. It is precisely in this emptiness, according to various concepts, for example, in Eastern philosophy or phenomenology, that new forms, interactions, or awareness can arise, creating potential for being or cognition that departs from the mechanistic understanding of space as a passive receptacle. Key aspects of the philosophical understanding of empty space: structure and potential. Even empty space has structure. It is not absolute nothingness, but rather an unfilled state that allows objects to coexist and interact. Opposition to mechanism. Classical philosophy often viewed space as a passive background. The principle of empty space, especially in Eastern teachings such as Buddhism, where the concept of shunyata, emptiness, is central, emphasizes that it is precisely the absence of fixed content that creates room for change and development. Relation to time. Time and space are inseparable, and empty space is also connected with the flow of time, providing the possibility for events to emerge. Phenomenological dimension. For phenomenology, emptiness can be a place for subjective experience and awareness, where consciousness forms its world without being burdened by things in themselves. Kant. Thus, empty space in philosophy is not merely an absence, but a dynamic category that allows content, action, and awareness to arise, acting as a condition for the possibility of being, rather than merely its passive form. The power of attraction. The mere measurement effect. The mere measurement effect is a phenomenon used in behavioral psychology. It explains that simply measuring or questioning a person's intentions or their anticipated regret changes their subsequent behavior. The mere measurement effect has been demonstrated in many behavioral contexts, both general and specific. However, it is most often used to explain consumer behavior. In this context, the effect means that simply questioning a person's intention to make a purchase influences their decision in the marketplace. In the article, Does Measuring Intent Change Behavior?, Morowitz et al. Outline two main explanations of this effect. First, answering a question about behavioral intention increases the accessibility of one's own attitude. As a result, a person's subsequent behavior will be more consistent with the attitude that underlies it. Second, answering a question about intention forces a person to engage in demanding cognitive work, which can lead to changes in attitude and intention. and ultimately to changes in behavior. These are the two main explanations of the mere measurement effect that can be applied across different behavioral contexts. However, Galvin Fitzsimons and Morwitz further expand these explanations in their later article, written in 2004, The Mere Measurement Effect: Why Measuring Intentions Changes Actual Behavior. In it, building on Morwitz's two previous explanations, they propose four explanations for why measuring intentions influences behavior. The mere measurement effect may be the result of all, several, or one of these explanations. Increased accessibility of labels. Questioning one's own intentions increases the salience of feelings and thoughts associated with a particular behavior. Increased accessibility of attitudes. This increases the degree to which a person can access their attitude toward performing a particular behavior, especially the most important option among a set of options. Attitude polarization. Measuring intention can lead to polarization of attitudes toward the most significant option, and thus change subsequent behavior. Increased accessibility of intentions. Questioning one's own intentions makes the execution of those intentions and certain types of behavior more accessible overall. The concept of attention. Attention is the concentration of the subject's activity at a given moment in time on some real or ideal object, an item, event, image, reasoning, and so on. The functions of attention consist in the fact that a person, among the multitude of stimuli acting on them, selects what is necessary and important, while inhibiting others, develops programs of action, and maintains focus and control over their execution. Voluntary attention is planned attention. It is the control of an action that takes place on the basis of a developed plan, selected criteria, and methods of their application. Involuntary attention is also a form of control, but a type of control that is limited to what is present in the object or situation, to what catches the eye by itself. The content of the activity of such attention consists of what is reflected by perception or thinking, memory, or feelings. Attention as an act of control can be formed. To do this, it is necessary not only to set a task, but also to teach how to check its fulfillment on the basis of certain criteria in a specific direction and sequence. One should begin with organizing control as an external action, an action performed in a material or materialized form. Then, through step-by-step development, the action of control is brought to a mental, generalized, reduced, and automated form when it actually turns into an act of attention. Attention plays an important role in human life. Thanks to attention, a person's activity and behavior are regulated. Without attention, purposeful, practical activity, neither physical nor mental, is impossible, because a person must relate attentively to the object and the plan of their activity, carefully monitor its course and consequences. Attention is a necessary condition for clear, conscious perception of educational material and its solid assimilation. According to the views of K. D. Ushinsky, attention is the only door of our soul through which all objects of the external world reflected by consciousness undoubtedly pass. Psychologists and physiologists have long tried to clarify the mechanisms that determine the selectivity of excitation processes and underlie attention. However, these attempts often had a descriptive character, and the physiological foundations of attention were not studied in depth. Thus, the nature of attention was considered as a result of motor adaptation. This meant that attention includes a muscular, motor element. Attention was also understood as a result of limiting the volume of consciousness. J. Herbart believed that attention depends on the strength of a new representation and on how it relates to old representations. Hamilton pointed out that when one representation is intense, it displaces others. Opponents of this theory emphasize the vagueness of the concept of an intense representation. Attention singles out an object among many others. Physiologically, this means that some nerve centers are excited while others are inhibited. The law of induction of nervous processes established by I.P. Pavlov operates here, according to which processes of excitation arising in certain areas of the brain cause processes of inhibition in other areas. Synchronicity, meaning, and satisfaction with life. One of the potential mechanisms, according to existential and humanistic theories, is people's search for meaning in their lives. The process of searching for meaning in life is considered by some theorists to be healthy and positive. For example, some studies have found a positive relationship between the search for meaning and life, as well as such positive outcomes as openness, ambition, and engagement. However, other studies have shown that the search for meaning is associated with lower levels of well-being and with greater anxiety, depression, and rumination. Thus, the relationship between the search for meaning and indicators of well-being appears to be complex and multifaceted, suggesting that the interaction between these constructs may require further clarification. This study aimed to expand knowledge about the relationship between the search for meaning and well-being by pointing to the role of awareness of synchronicity and meaning-making as possible mediators. Research shows that the search for meaning can function as a mental state or schema that allows people to identify information related to meaning in life. Since James's assertion that my experience is what I agree to attend to, it has long been recognized that our attentional choices can shape our experience. For example, the human need to experience life as coherent motivates people to prefer clarity and structure over ambiguity and uncertainty. In this sense, higher levels of meaning in life have been reported after exposure to coherent stimuli compared to random ones. Moreover, when faced with threats to their sense of personal control, people tend to detect patterns in random events. It has long been recognized that a sense of meaning in life contributes to the perception of life satisfaction as an activating mechanism for an optimal way of living. Extensive research has shown that the presence of meaning is beneficial for a range of well-being indicators. Moreover, recent studies show that activities aimed at cultivating meaning, that is, prioritizing meaning on a daily basis, are associated with a greater sense of meaning in life, which in turn positively correlates with various indicators of well-being. Thus, when people experience unpredictable events as coherent and meaningful, this may be associated with a greater sense of meaning in life. Optimism can be defined as a tendency to maintain generalized positive expectations even under adverse circumstances. According to this view, people with higher optimism expect good things in the future and therefore actively strive to achieve their goals. According to expectancy value models, desired goals guide and motivate our behavior. If a person has an internal, goal-directed purpose that is believed to be attainable, the result is greater effort engagement and higher life satisfaction. The theory of correspondent inference. This is a psychological theory that systematically explains an observer's inferences about what an actor was trying to achieve through a particular action. The purpose of this theory is to explain why people make internal or external attributions. People compare their actions with alternative actions in order to evaluate the choice they made, and by considering various factors, they may decide whether their behavior was caused by an internal disposition. This model uses the covariation model. More precisely, the degree to which a person attributes behavior to the person rather than to the situation. These factors are as follows: whether the person has a choice about engaging in the action, whether their behavior is expected given their social role, and whether their behavior is a result of their usual behavior. The consequences of the chosen action must be compared with the consequences of possible alternative actions. The fewer common consequences the possible choices have, the more confidently a correspondent inference can be made. Or, in other words, the clearer the consequences of the choice, the more confidently one can infer intention and disposition. Suppose a student plans to apply to graduate school and has shortlisted two colleges, the University College London and the London School of Economics. They choose UCL rather than LSE. What can a social observer learn from this? First, there are many common effects. An urban environment, the same distance from home, the same examination system, similar academic reputation, and so on. These common effects give the observer no clues about the student's motivation. But if the observer believes that UCL has better sports facilities or easier access to the university library, then these incompatible or unique effects may provide a clue about the student's motivation. But suppose they shortlisted UCL and the University of Essex, and they choose UCL. Now, the observer is faced with a number of incompatible effects: city size, distance from home, academic reputation, examination system. In this case, the observer would be much less confident in making an inference about a specific intention or disposition when there are many incompatible effects. The fewer incompatible effects there are, the more confident the attribution of intention. Another factor that helps determine a disposition to act is whether the actor's behavior is constrained by situational forces or whether it occurs by choice. If the student were assigned to argue a particular position in a class discussion, for example, for or against neoliberalism, it would be unreasonable for the audience to conclude that the student's statements in the debate reflect their true beliefs, since the student did not choose to argue that side of the issue. However, if the student chose to argue one side of the issue, then the audience could infer that the student's statements reflect their true beliefs. And with that, we come to the end of our journey through the most important philosophical ideas that have shaped human thought over thousands of years. If you resonate with these calm conversations about meaning, consciousness, and inner strength, support the channel by subscribing. It helps me understand that you value such deep and measured lectures. Write in the comments which philosophical movements, thinkers, or ideas you would like to hear about next. Often, it is your questions that lead me to new topics worth exploring and discussing together. Thank you for being with me on this journey of thought. Ahead lies even more philosophy, quiet, clarity, and discovery. See you in the next video.